My mother was a fiercely independent woman, for those of you who are wondering where I got it. And during the last decade of her life, she very reluctantly had to learn to slowly and graciously accept more and more help with the basic activities of life. The first lesson came as she was being discharged from a hospital in Madison. She had just been diagnosed with congestive heart failure, and she was truly exhausted after a week of tests, back in those days when you stayed in the hospital for a week, when she was anxious and she had gotten little sleep. And before she went home, the nurse suggested that she could get help taking a bath. Now, my sisters and I thought that was an excellent idea, but my mother absolutely refused. She could do it herself. Until an aide came into the room, and the aide was a very slight African-American woman with a huge heart. And she told my mom that she would help her take a bath and she would treat her like a queen. And the aide kept talking and talking until she assured my mom that she wanted to go home clean and she wanted to go home warm and she would be treated like a queen. Finally, that whole idea of being treated like a queen sank into my mother's heart, and she agreed. And it was a really good first experience in learning how to graciously accept help when she needed help. And I have to confess, I hadn't thought about that moment until I thought about how Peter reacted to Jesus' offer of washing his feet. Now, Peter, unlike some of us, was not uncomfortable because someone was going to wash his feet. That was a practice all good hosts offered their guests in the first century. I mean, let's face it, first century Israel did not have paved roads, and they had a lot of animals. And the waste of the animals was not scooped up by county workers. So people walked through all sorts of stuff. And when they walked into someone's home as a guest, the host made sure to provide a basin of water and a towel so the person could wash their feet. Unless, of course, the host was wealthy. And if the host was wealthy and had slaves, the slaves would then wash the feet of the guests. So Peter did not object to having his feet washed. He objected to Jesus taking on the role of a slave. Now, as an aside, the word slave is much more loaded today than it was in first century Israel. Anyone who was a slave of a Jew in first century Israel was really an indentured servant. The rich Jew bought the person from a Roman soldier, most likely, and then had that person work until they had paid off the amount that they had been paid for. Does that make sense at all? Indentured servant. An indentured servant worked for their host, but only Romans had real slaves, and they were the men, women, and children of defeated nations. Now, when a battle was waged and the people lost, well, the Roman soldiers got to claim some of those people who'd been defeated as their slaves. It's one of the ways that Roman soldiers, well, were able to afford to be Roman soldiers. It was only American slavery that brought racism. The racism that came with the American sin of slavery was not an issue in first century Israel. Now, it was still wrong to have slaves, but racism was an issue because slaves and servants were people of all colors. It was only America that made it into an issue of race. Peter objected to Jesus serving him because he did not like the idea of Jesus being a slave or an indentured servant. Peter did not like the idea of Jesus owing anyone anything. And Peter knew that Jesus was the master, and he was there to serve Jesus, not the other way around. Okay, that was one reason Peter didn't want Jesus washing his feet, but there was a lot more to the story. Because Peter was a disciple of Jesus. And disciples in those days became so to learn how to do what the teacher did. Now, Peter was a pretty independent guy. He owned his own fishing business. He was a self-employed, lower middle-class person. He was able to pay his bills. He was able to take care of his family. He was able to repay for anyone from whom he borrowed money. He was not a slave, nor was he an indentured servant. He did not want to take on the role of slave or indentured servant because Peter believed, well, he was better than that. So Peter did not want to accept Jesus' offer to wash his feet because Peter did not want to accept the role of a servant who washed the feet of anyone else. Peter believed Jesus was too good for that, and Peter was darn sure that he was too good for that. So following Jesus puts us in an uncomfortable place. We're asked to accept service when it's offered, and we're expected to offer service when it's needed. And like Peter, there are times when we just don't want to do either one. Jesus gave us the example for graciously receiving service when it was offered. Now, most of us don't mind accepting service when we pay for it. We expect employees to service at restaurants, and we compensate them with, well, their pay, but more often with tips. We expect people in hotels to take care of us, the housekeepers to come in and make our beds and clean our bathrooms every day, and we don't mind that because sometimes we leave a tip, and other times we know that the hotel's paying them. We expect people who work for the city, the county, the nation, and the church to take care of us. We're paying people to take care of us, and honestly, we get upset when they don't take care of us very well. But when service is freely offered without an exchange of money, especially from someone we believe should not be serving us, we get very uncomfortable. For instance, when I was growing up, I desperately wanted to be a bag girl at the grocery store. I mean, I watched the bag boys, and they got to place the customers' groceries into paper bags and then carry those paper bags to the customers' cars. I thought that was awesome. And now today, I love bagging groceries. When I go to the store, I deliberately get into the You Bag It line to see if I can keep up with the cashier. And I put the cold things with the cold things, the cleaning stuff with the cleaning stuff. I mean, I love it. And when I get done bagging my stuff, well, I offer to do it for the next person in line, and they get very uncomfortable. And even when the cashier assures them that I'm not trying to steal from them, and I'm not going to do anything nasty for them, I don't expect anything in return, most people just decline and insist on bagging their own groceries. The only people who are willing to accept, and I can tell, are people who already live in assisted living. I watch them because I put their bags in their grocery cart, or I offer to help carry them out, and they get on the transit bus, and they're very gracious about accepting help. Why? Because they've already learned how to accept help. Most of us are really uncomfortable being served, especially when we need the help. We are fiercely independent. And we would much rather serve than be served, unless, of course, that serving involves something up close and personal. I mean, pouring a cup of coffee is one thing. Helping someone wash their feet, or something even more intimate and personal, well, that's something completely else. Yet we follow Jesus. And Jesus did not hesitate to serve anyone. He put his hands on those who are ill. How many of us don't like to shake hands with somebody if they've recently coughed? And yet Jesus put his hands on those who were seriously ill, who had seriously contagious diseases. He touched the eyes of those who were blind. He healed the lepers. He embraced a man who had been raised back to life after spending several days in a really hot and really smelly tomb. Jesus served those who truly needed to be served, and he did so willingly and graciously and lovingly. And Jesus also accepted service from others. He accepted ointment on his feet one evening at dinner. Who of us can imagine that? You. He accepted ointment on his head at another dinner. Okay, who can picture that? You. He accepted the gratitude of those who needed to thank him for his care. He accepted meals from those who were willing to offer meals, and he did so with grace and gratitude. He accepted the support of all those who supported his ministry with grace and gratitude. And Jesus taught us that accepting and offering service comes from a sense of profound humility. Humility that says we're not too good to require help, and we're never too good that we can refuse to help someone else. Humility and generosity go hand in hand. So our assignment this week is this. When someone generously and humbly offers to help us, let's just swallow our pride and give the gift of receiving help. When we see an opportunity to serve, let's humbly and generously ask for permission to offer our service. Don't just leap in and do it. That's a Joe Biden thing. Don't do it. But ask permission to offer service. I've learned a lot from that aide at that hospital. Because with my mother, she humbly and generously took on the role of servant, which, given the loaded word and context, she just humbly and generously offered to serve. She humbly and generously offered to treat my mother like a queen. And it was her humility and her generosity that allowed my mother to accept the bath that she really needed. And later I expressed my gratitude, and we got to talking. And she asked where I was from and what I did, and I told her I was a United Methodist pastor, and then she told me she was a believer. I told her it showed. Jesus offered to wash Peter's feet, and Peter had a lot of trouble accepting that. Maybe we can do a little bit better at accepting and offering service. Maybe we can follow Jesus' example of generosity and humility. And remember, this is one of those times when it's helpful to keep in our heads that no one ever said following Jesus was easy. Amen.